This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to Augusta Free Press on Facebook. I'm Chris Graham, and we're going to talk some UVA basketball, NCAA Tournament basketball, as painful as that is for the Virginia fans out there. A lot of folks who follow us on Facebook are Virginia basketball fans. I talk a lot of Virginia basketball. I thought I'd have a lot more to talk about as the year would go on. Hey, some good news. I'm being facetious, of course. The good news is that we only fell to number 2 in Ken Palm, so we have that going for us. But yeah, what a shocker, obviously, and I'm still not over it, and I'm sure you're not either. And at least for me, I didn't have to go to work. I work here in an office that I can make my own rules. This has been a hard day for a lot of you guys, I'm sure, going out to work and having to take the sympathy or crap from your fellow coworkers over Friday night's result. I can say this for me as a journalist who was planning to go to San Antonio, much less the trip we made to Charlotte, and then planning to go to Atlanta this week. We came back, Scott German and I, and Scott's son Andrew, who went with us on the trip to Charlotte, planned to stay the 3-day weekend. We just packed up the car, checked out the hotels Friday night, technically Saturday morning, about 1 o'clock, and just came on back. I caught myself shopping on Saturday and Sunday, and just every time I'd go into a store, just not believing I was actually in Virginia, and trying to avoid people as much as possible, and even ran into somebody, Chris Losh. You might remember Chris. Some of you folks might remember Chris, longtime radio host in the area. Big UVA fan. He and I would often be. I was a guest on his radio show an awful lot, talking UVA sports. The last thing I wanted to do was talk to anybody, and then Chris and I. Of course, I couldn't avoid a fellow UVA fan. I got a phone call today from Jeff Fife, who I work with on a lot of things, marketing capacity. He's at the Waynesville YMCA. And, I wanted to talk business. Jeff wanted to get my thoughts on the situation. And for 20 minutes, then I'm giving him the rundown. And so, now I need to drink some more tonight, apparently. But, we're all coping. As much as we all feel bad individually, of course, the people you feel worse for are the roughly 20 people or so in that locker room, in the room at JPJ, the coaching staff and the players, who work so hard. I mean, I'm not going to take away from this season. I don't think anybody should. 31-3 is what it is. 31-2 regular season. I wrote a couple of columns this weekend, and I'll probably be, in some sense, recapping them, but maybe extrapolating upon them. This was the most dominant ACC team that I can remember seeing. I have covered the ACC for over 20 years, dating back to 1995 as a journalist, right out of college, basically. Whatever level of expertise I can claim to have had as all the way back to elementary school, the beginning of the Raycom era, when there'd be the triple headers on Saturdays and the weeknight games and the natural light commercials in the middle of the night. I mean, remembering the Food Line commercials with the face of, what was that guy, Tom Smith and Terry Holland, how much they looked alike. I've been following this conference for a long, long time. We've had national champions, lots of them come out of this conference. Carolina's won a few, Duke's won a few. Maryland, when they were in the ACC, won a national championship. I think that was in 2002. I thought this Virginia team was as dominant up until the end of the regular season, including the ACC tournament, as any of those teams that won championships. And it's not hard to say why. Virginia won 20 of 21 games in ACC play this year, including the ACC tournament. First team to win 17 regular season games. Of course, now the season's 18 games long. It used to be 14, and it was 16. Now it's 18. I think it's going to be 20 in a couple of years. But a 17-1 regular season after, the 2014 and 2015 years, when Virginia went 16-2 each of those years and had a chance to go 17-1. They actually won the 17th game this year. Like the 2014 team, they won the ACC tournament. So the 20 wins then surpassing their own record of 19, including the tournament. I think a Duke team had gone 16-0 back in the mid-2000s. Then won the ACC tournament. So 20 wins in an ACC season, breaking a record. The one loss, I mean, gosh, we can look at that and say it was a 1-point loss. Virginia led the game with 6 seconds left. They had a shot at the end to win it. They had a shot at the end of regulation to win it. So they were either 6 seconds or one of 2 last-second shots away from a perfect ACC season. And it wasn't a fluke by any stretch of the imagination. This team led, I did the math on this. They led for something like 77% of the minutes they played this season. There were 5 games in which Virginia never trailed. There were 3 other games in which they trailed for less than a minute and 32 seconds. Only 3 games this season in which Virginia trailed by a majority of the game. And of course, they won those games. Actually, the Tech game they did lose, but the Florida State game, I think it was, and then the Louisville game at Louisville trailed most of those games, came back and won those games. The one loss on the road outside of conference play was the West Virginia loss back on December 5th. That game was a 2-point game with under a minute and a half left. Virginia had 2 possessions to take the lead in that game. Back when nobody thought this team was going to go to the heights that they were. This team started the season unranked in the regular season in either of the 2 national polls. They were picked 6th in the ACC. And went 31-2. Did all those dominating things. Earned the number 1 overall national seed, and then went and laid an egg. Lost by 20 points to UMBC, a team that I would say last night's performance by the Retrievers in a way validated their effort. It wasn't a total fluke. I'll be honest, I half expected them to go out and lose by 30 points last night, and that game was a 3-point game against Kansas State with under a minute and a half to go. They had a chance. It was a drive to the basket, got blocked. They could have shot a 3 and tied it. Ended up losing by 7. But outside of shooting 29%, they played ugly and kept themselves in a game against Kansas State, who's now in the Sweet 16, and a team that had won at Kansas this year. So, hats off to UMBC for what they did to validate what they did Friday night. In the second round, they didn't rest on their laurels. They didn't say this is far enough. We've done what we're supposed to do. The first 16 to beat a 1 ever in NCAA tournament history. They went out and played their butts off last night and played well defensively. They didn't shoot well, certainly. Jairus Lyles, who had 28 points on 9 of 11 shooting in the win over Virginia, struggled last night. I'm not sure if he got the double figures eventually. He may have in the last minute. But really a different game for them shooting-wise last night. The hard part for us Virginia fans is reconciling how this Virginia team could have been so dominant in the regular season and then played so poorly on Friday night down in Charlotte. And, those who watched our post-game, those who've read, if you've read either of the columns I've written post-game, you know that I'm still not of the persuasion that X's and O's were the difference here. I think that this game wasn't lost X's and O's as much as it was lost prep or lack of prep. It's hard for me to reconcile, too, that a Tony Bennett coach team could not be prepared for a game. This is a team, and I wrote this in my column that I wrote on Saturday, this is a team that, in a program, not just this team, but the Tony Bennett program, which I've covered closely for the 9 years he's been the coach, and the last 5 years that have been so great for UVA sports, UVA basketball. It's so businesslike in its approach. Tony Bennett talks about the 5 pillars of his program, and humility being the number 1 and the linchpin to the whole operation. And I can't imagine that a Tony Bennett coach team would approach a game against a 16 seed with anything other than the humility to know that they could beat you on any given night. That said, UMBC certainly came in without any pedigree. They had played a number of Power 5 conference teams and lost those games. America East champions that they were blown out by Maryland, blown out by Arizona, among others. And now that said, their number 16 seed was based on a low RPI and 10 POM ranking, which doesn't factor into the seeding, but I think their RPI or their 10 POM was something like 184. That said, obviously down the stretch, they had to win the America East. The America East is a conference that plays its tournament games on the higher seeds home floor, so had to win at Vermont, a team that won 27 games this year, had to beat them on the Catamounts home floor to qualify for the NCAA tournament. So, maybe in the future the NCAA tournament can look at things like RPI and say, maybe this team, oh yeah, they lost some games early on, but they got better as the season went on. They were 12-4 in conference play in the regular season, lost both their games to Vermont by double digits. Home loss, I think it's 23 points. But they won down the stretch, and some talent on that team. Jarris Lyles, the young man I mentioned who had the 28 points on 9 of 11 shooting, he was a VCU transfer. He didn't play much at VCU, to be honest, in his year there. Just a couple minutes a game off the bench in his year there. But he was recruited by, I want to say that was the Shaka Smart era, perhaps. I have to look back at the train of all the VCU coaches in recent years. But, Lyles, and the son of Lester Lyles, former UVA player, his mother and father both UVA alums. And, of course, Ryan Odom, the coach at UMBC, he's a UVA graduate. His father, Dave Odom, a legendary assistant coach at UVA, he was the assistant coach, the top assistant coach under Terry Holland for a number of years, left in '89 to become the coach at Wake Forest. But, coaching pedigree for Ryan Odom that includes, a great run in UVA lore, basketball lore. And he was a ball boy at UVA as a youngster, 6, 7 years old, running around out there as the ball boy in U-Haul. So UVA ties to this team certainly from that perspective. And I talked a lot when Scott and I were breaking down the game after the game in Charlotte Friday night. We talked a lot about X's and O's that night. I'm not sure there were a lot of X's and O's, but here's what we had in that game. We all know, if you're watching this Facebook Live, Virginia defensively, the pack line, which is a man defense with zone principles, ball pressure, post doubles, you're willing to surrender contested threes, but those are contested threes. These two teams came in both identically, 39% from three-point range as teams this year. So you knew going in, and that's a good percentage. Virginia led the ACC at 39%. They were both in the top 30 in the country going into that game with that shooting percentage from three-point range. So you knew that UMBC could shoot it, because we know if they shoot 39%, and we know Virginia can shoot 39%. We know Virginia's a good shooting team, so they had shooters, and they could knock those shots down if they were open. 5 of 12 in the first half from three-point range for UMBC, but only 21 points. And so Virginia had 21 points as well, but we've seen Virginia teams struggle in the first half of games. That's nothing new. And so at halftime, you could look at the score and say 21-21. Okay, Virginia will go back to the locker room. They'll make adjustments. They'll figure this out. But the problem that I saw even then, and I don't know if you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw some of my thoughts. You could have written them off yourself, like I was trying to write my own thoughts off. Well, this is just nervousness over the NCAA tournament, and me watching this and being nervous about rooting for the team that I'm also covering. But what concerned me wasn't the defense at the time. It was the defense did its job. 21 points on 28 possessions for UMBC. That's actually a little bit better than the season-long clip for UVA basketball, which was a 21 points Virginia scored on offense, and it was I think it was 1 for 10 from three-point range, 0 assists, which I didn't even notice until a Twitter user tweeted me to that effect. Say, hey, did you notice that Virginia had 0 assists in the first half? I didn't notice that, but I did notice that the offense was very stagnant, and to a point where the mover blocker offense. We talked about the pack line defense. The mover blocker offense is basically a motion offense. You have two bigs; they're setting screens all the time. Sometimes off the screens they'll post up. Sometimes off the screens they'll set more screens. And the guards are supposed to run off those screens, and they'll either flare cut or they'll hard curl. The curl gets them in the lane. The flare cut gets them to the three-point line. And basically you're reading and reacting to what the defense gives you, and kind of go from there. You don't really call set plays out of the mover blocker. You can call set plays, but generally speaking, you just let the flow kind of dictate what you do. Well, what happened was, I've written about this. I've seen David Teal write about this. A couple others, Mike Barber wrote about this as well. That UMBC surprised Virginia a bit. They didn't have tape of this necessarily if you're Virginia preparing for the game, but they actually kind of used pack line principles against Virginia defensively, and they were doubling the post. They seemed to have figured out the formula to the screens, whether there would be a flare cut or a curl cut, and it kind of took both of those away somehow. So Virginia was running the offense. The guards were coming off the screens, but there were no passing lanes. So what would happen then is the point guard, sort of at the top of the key extended, would be kind of stuck pounding the ball on the floor for an unseemly amount of time. That Virginia wasn't getting any flow offensively. The shots that came were shots that were sort of slop. I wrote that in one of my observations at halftime. There was a lot of slop points, offensive rebound kind of points, or passes that kind of fell into guys' hands that led to baskets, but certainly nothing that was by design from the mover blocker. And it seemed like to me, as that first half wore on, the last couple of minutes of the first half, that Virginia's players were so frustrated by the lack of anything really flowing offensively that you saw guys kind of standing. And the Virginia offense doesn't work with guys standing. The whole Virginia system doesn't work with guys standing. The way Virginia beats you, Tony Bennett has said this numerous times in the past, they're a possession-by-possession team. It's sort of the accumulative effect of playing hard against the defense. The pack line defense makes you work so hard to get shots off. Then you have to go on the other end of the floor. You got to chase guys around through screens. You're constantly getting bumped off screens. You have to keep up with this flurry of activity that you wear out. And as the game goes on, you're less effective on both ends of the floor. Virginia's used to playing this way, and they sort of knock you out, but they 12-round decision you in boxing parlance. So, but when they're standing around like they were on offense, well, you're not working as hard anymore. The defense isn't working as hard, and so maybe you got a little bit more energy on the offensive side. Well, second half, I don't know that was the case coming out of the locker room. 17-3 run for UMBC to start the second half to take the 38-24 lead they took. That had us all thinking, okay, now this is real now. I mean, this is beyond real. At this point, it's already 16 minutes to go in the game, and it doesn't feel like Virginia is going to get anything going here. But what they were doing was they hit 4 or 5 from 3. Now, they weren't open shots. They were contested shots, but they went in. Whereas Virginia on the other end finishes 4 of 22 from 3. Some rush shots, but certainly a lot of shots that just sort of rolled around the rim came out. But it could be as simple as that. And the shots were going in for UMBC. All of a sudden, Virginia drifts a little further out. The pack line, again, it's an imaginary kind of thing, but the pack line is a man defense with zone principles. And the idea is that there's a sort of imaginary line around the basket, a sort of a perimeter around the basket, 16 feet out to the basket, where you have all your guys playing man, but they're also forming that pack that makes it hard for dribble drivers to penetrate. And so they'll give you those contested threes. They'll give you those contested long mid-range jump shots. And if you make those shots, great, but you're not going to make them the whole game. Well, it just happened that when UMBC starts 4 or 5 from 3 and they're up 14 points, it's hard not to, if you're a Virginia defender, just start instinctively moving a little further out than you're supposed to. And what that does is then opens up those lanes for both drivers and cutters. And you saw a lot of drives and cuts that led to open baskets in the paint. And in fact, in the second half, I ran these numbers. 10 of 13 from inside the paint were UMBC in that game. But a team with a 4-guard lineup, a 5'7" point guard, a couple 6'2" guys, a 6'6" guy, and a 6'9" center. And this lineup was 10 of 13 in the paint against Virginia in the second half, a team that stopped everybody they played this year. They beat Carolina twice. They beat Duke. They beat Syracuse twice. They beat Louisville 3 times, among others. I mean, in the 20-1 run in the ACC. So it's snowballed. Virginia then starts on the other end. They're down, all of a sudden, they're down 14 points. The offense still stagnant, and they're rushing shots. They're seeing air balls thrown up. They're seeing shots hit the front of the rim. And Virginia had no answer. And so now here's why we'll go to the X's and O's standpoint on the offensive side. Because defensively, sometimes teams shoot the lights out. I wrote in my column that I wrote today, well, sometimes the hand of God comes down from heaven and says, UMBC. And they're 12 of 24 from three-point range. That's 50%. They're a team that shoots 39%. So you take away 3 of those, and they're at 38%. So that's 9 less points. If Virginia's 4 of 22, normal game out of 22 shots, they're probably going to make 8 or 9 of those. So you give Virginia 4 or 5 more, that's 12 or 15 points. So the swing of 24 points is still a 4-point game, but in Virginia's favor, still a much closer game than it should have been. Maybe then, if you could also argue then if UMBC is not hitting everything from 3, what they seem like they were, maybe the defense doesn't jut out further than it should from the pack line principles. Maybe the lane isn't as open. They're not 10 of 13 from the paint. They're probably more like they were against Kansas State. Kansas State was the other side. They shot 29% for that game against Kansas State. So, that's the other extreme for UMBC as far as this goes. But, now we get to where we are, which is this is another March loss for this program. And going into this season with a 31-2 record, the question always was from the national media types, the prognosticators who don't follow this program closely, all they do is look at final scores and then see Virginia play in March, is can this team win in March? And the reason that those who don't watch the games but look at the scores and then watch Virginia play in March, they say, well, here's why Virginia can't win in March. They don't score enough points. And then we score 54 points in a game in the NCAA Tournament, lose by 20 to a 16 seed. And that reinforces, at least for those people who don't watch the program closely, that narrative. And here's where that's wrong, but here's where I guess I can also say here's where it's right. Here's where it's wrong. This team this season, even with that horrible performance Friday night, you look at the Ken Pom, which I joked at the beginning of this podcast. At least we only thought number 2 of Ken Pom after this past week. Whatever good that does us, right? You look at the efficiency numbers, and Virginia's 30th in the country offensive efficiency. Now, 30th in the country is not first or second. It's not what Duke does. It's not what Villanova does. But there are 351 teams in Division I. 30th is still upper 10th. It's within the 10th percentile of offenses in the country. So, I mean, that's more than efficient enough on an aggregate basis to win, as they did, 31 games. There's nothing fluky about this team's season of 31 wins this season. But it's sort of like when I was talking about how Virginia wins games by bludgeoning you over the. It's not the one swing of the axe that knocks you down. It's the repetitive nature of it. That's sort of how you win on an aggregate with this team. They over the course of the season playing that style of ball they play, they're going to beat a lot of good teams. And 21 in the ACC. This is an ACC with 4 teams in the Sweet 16. Those 4 teams in the ACC in the Sweet 16 combined 0-6 record against Virginia. So there's no flukiness to that at all. But in a one-and-done scenario, and we saw this happen actually in all 3 losses for Virginia. I think there was one commonality in all 3 losses that Virginia had this year. Now, the UMBC game was an outlier in one sense because UMBC shot so well from the floor. But if Virginia runs its offense as efficiently as it normally does, they still win the game, as I just pointed out. The other 2 losses were Virginia Tech and West Virginia. And here's what happened in both those games. Both of those teams, coaches Bob Huggins at West Virginia and Buzz Williams at Virginia Tech, they both Bob Huggins did what he always does. He plays a 40 minutes, 94 feet, full court, pressure in your face, ball guard dominant defense that really gave Virginia fits. And what happened in that game was, from an offensive standpoint, Virginia really shot a lot of threes. We remember, I think Kyle Guy had 13 or 14 three-point attempts in that game, among other things, and forced Virginia to bomb away from outside. And when you're shooting a lot of threes, I mean, even if you make 33% of them, which from an effective field goal percentage standpoint is 50%, you can go long stretches without scoring, and that can really just gum up the works. And that did in that game. And Virginia still lost that game. I mentioned it was a 2-point game with a minute and a half to go. Virginia had 2 possessions, 2 turnovers, where they could have either tied the game or taken a lead, and what became a 7-point loss. The Virginia Tech game, I mentioned, 1-point loss. They led by a point with 6 seconds to go. Virginia Tech gets a loose ball, makes a basket, and Virginia still has chances to win at the end of regulation, at the end of the overtime. Last shot, Ty Jerome missed both the last shots there. Could have won that game. That's how close Virginia was to perfection in the ACC this year. In that game, though, to get to that stage, Virginia played good defense, and they played good defense against West Virginia, too. That's why those 2 games stayed close against opponents that sort of figured Virginia out offensively. But what Virginia Tech did was Buzz Williams all season long had not used, at least from my viewing of Virginia Tech games at that point, had not used any kind of his own defense, but he used his own defense in that game. And it was almost an extreme version of the pack line because, I mean, I'm sitting at JPJ when I'm watching games from inside JPJ. The media section at JPJ is not courtside like it is in a lot of arenas. It's actually elevated. We're in section 108 at JPJ, so we're halfway up, maybe 2/3 of the way up the floor. So we have that view from behind the basket, and great view for me to see what Virginia Tech was doing. They had literally most possessions of that game, Virginia Tech had 5 guys with at least 1 foot in the paint. And they dared Virginia, hey, we'll give you those jump shots. We'll give you those 3-point shots. And Virginia shot 38 of them, made 11 of them. If Virginia shoots 39% like they do for the season, what would that be? It'd be like 14 or 15 of them. They win the game by 10 points. It doesn't go to overtime, but they didn't. They were 11 for 38. Give Virginia Tech credit for closing out on those shots and taking what looks like an open 3 and making it a contested 3. Virginia didn't make enough of them to win the game. And so, those games were controlled by those teams attacking what Virginia does offensively, taking away what you can do offensively. And what's interesting about that is, particularly with Virginia Tech, they use something different than what West Virginia and UMBC did. West Virginia, all guard dominant team, pressure in your face. Ty Jerome didn't respond well to that. I wrote a couple columns after that game about Ty Jerome and how that was a tough game for him. Javon Carter was up in his grill. Javon Carter, rightly so, getting a lot of votes for All-American games. I voted for him after that game. And I kept memory of that game from December 5th. And when I voted the USBWA All-American team, I put Javon Carter on my 10-man team because he struck that much of a nerve with me in terms of how he played that game against Virginia. Tech played a different approach. They played a zone approach. Virginia plays zone teams well. They beat Syracuse twice. They beat Duke this year. Two teams that play zone because they can go into the game. They can go into the game with a game plan of here's how you play a zone. Virginia Tech didn't show that ahead of time, and Virginia didn't respond. They never adjusted to the way they needed to play. And it was clear that I can't say that I watched any UMBC except for some highlights. Literally, highlights don't give you anything in terms of X's and O's about a team. But I have to imagine that they didn't show that kind of zone defense, or that kind of not zone defense, pack-line defense, pack-line-like defense they showed against Virginia Friday night. And the frustrating thing for an observer of the program like me and for folks like you is that there were no adjustments seemingly made in game, or at least there was no evidence of adjustments that would have been made, that were executed, at least on the floor. We've been called several timeouts trying to adjust things. But in the end, now there was one play, I think after the 38-24 lead, after that particular 3-point play that they got to lead up to 14, Tony called a timeout. And the next play that Virginia ran was I've never seen this before. Certainly not this year, the last couple of years, but I don't remember a Tony Bennett team ever knowing what they did out of that timeout. Actually posted Ty Jerome up on the point guard, KJ Mora for UMBC. 5'7" point guard, Jerome 6'5". He's got almost a foot on the guy. He's got 10 inches on the guy. And he posted him up, got fouled, made the shot, got the free throw, and 3-point play, conventional 3-point play. And I'm thinking, all right, that's an adjustment. I've never seen it before, and they've never seen it before. And how will they adjust if Virginia keeps doing this? If they keep posting up Jerome on him, or if they switch Mora over onto either Hall or Guy, do they post those guys up? I mean, that's now we'll see how they respond. What are they got to do differently now? Do they try to double the ball out of his hands and we can swing the ball around? I mean, there's all these kind of things. Once you make an adjustment and they have to adjust, then we see what happens. Never ran that play again. Never ran that set again. Went back to the motion offense. Never again posted up the bar that I can recall. And that I don't count, when Devin Hall would move to stretch 4 and he would get the ball in the middle of the lane. No, you when you post your guard up and you make them respond, and in one play you run it, you get 3 points out of it. You go back to your motion offense. That's a little frustrating to watch because something worked, and make them figure it out. Make Ryan Odom, make him adjust in game and see what the response is. And so, that's why I wrote the column that I wrote today. The column I wrote today was, we've all been doing this. Those of us who've been getting on message boards and getting on Twitter and trying to soothe each other, I guess. There were some among us who were absolute idiots about this, saying Tony Bennett needs to be fired, and that's just ridiculous. From the fan base, but then also people outside. The people on the outside, they're waiting for Virginia to implode. It's not going to happen, obviously. I mean, but the implosion of Tony Bennett, God forbid, even gets an offer to go back to Wisconsin, which is the only place I fear that we ever lose him to. And Wisconsin didn't have a good year this year. I'm rooting for Wisconsin to win 25 games every year, because every time they do, that's another reason that Tony Bennett doesn't have to leave. God forbid he would ever leave, and we would go back to some other era, playing NITs and CBIs on a more regular basis than we are getting number one seeds. We don't get bored with winning. We don't get bored with 50-point games when you beat the other team by 10 points and so scoring in most situations, obviously. I've got confetti in my podcast room not too far from here, from Brooklyn. 2 ACC tournament championships in the last 5 years. As Tony's career continues at Virginia, he's going to win championships. He's going to win more championships. He's got 2 ACC tournament championships, 3 regular season championships. There's going to be Final Fours. There's going to be national titles. There's no question about that. So yeah, it's, the more reactionary among us outside of the fan base, calling for Tony's head, which is just ridiculous. This season was a great season. It just didn't end the right way. But that said, it's not automatic either that, yes, he will just win championships because he's Tony Bennett and he coaches the way he does. I read a column just before I came on live. David Teal. I like to think of myself as someone you have to read if you're going to know what's going on with UVA sports. And David Teal is someone I read. So if I want to know what's going on with UVA sports, so there's the recommendation there. And he wrote about how, and we've all done these comparisons, but, Jim Boeheim, who's been one of the guys standing up for Tony Bennett as stupid calls in the national media come for, oh, Tony can't win a much. He and Coach Krzyzewski both, Coach K. do, among the other coaches. But Boeheim, whose team is still playing after playing on Tuesday in the ACC tournament last week, and by the way, quick aside, how worthless is the ACC tournament now? The ACC tournament this year had Syracuse playing on Tuesday as the 11th seed. They won on Tuesday. They got blown out on Wednesday night. A few games after, Florida State got blown out Wednesday afternoon by a Louisville team that's not even playing anymore. They're in the NIT or whatever. Those two teams are in the Sweet 16. Clemson is in the Sweet 16. Credit to Clemson, they should be. They played their asses off and blew out Auburn last night. Duke, of course, is in the Sweet 16. But UNC and UVA, who played on Saturday, not losing on Wednesday, played on Saturday. Those teams aren't playing anymore. Carolina lost last night by 21 points. So, yeah, that's crazy. But so getting back to Jim Boeheim, didn't get to his first Final Four until his 9th season. And then, his 11th season. Then his next Final Four was 9 seasons later. He's got 1 national championship. Guy's been coaching for, 40 years? I mean, he's a legendary coach, Hall of Fame coach. But it took him 11 seasons to get in one, 9 seasons to get to his next one, and he didn't win his championship until 2003 with Carmelo Anthony, a one-and-done kid. So, you look at Coach K. I've run those numbers on him. He was a coach at Army for a couple of years. He got to a Final Four in '86 at Duke. That would have been like his 10th or 11th year. I'm sure I'm missing that number, and somebody will correct me on that. But he didn't finally win a championship until '91, so that would have been, he started coaching at Army in the late '70s. So, you're talking 13, 14 years for him. We all know Dean Smith. It took him 22 years to win a national championship. Even the great John Wooden. When I say he didn't make a Final Four until his 16th season, I'm not talking about the Final Four of today when there's 68 teams in the tournament. You have to play all these games to even get to a Final Four. And there are 351 college Division I teams. I'm talking about John Wooden in the era when the national tournament was, at some time, it got eventually to a height of 32 teams. Which means to get to a Final Four, you had to win 2 games. It took him 16 years to get to a Final Four. He eventually won 10 national championships. But, we forget that these coaches don't come out of the womb winning. These great coaches don't come out of the womb winning national championships and win the Final Fours. It takes work to get there. And a lot of learning and self-criticism to get there. And that's where I offered this bit of criticism between Bennett. And when I use the word criticism, I'm hopefully you do the same thing with what you do in life. I'll tell you, here's how I'll operate my life. I'm running Augusta Free Press. I'm looking at numbers all day long. I'm trying to figure out what people are reading. The clients I have in my marketing business do the same thing. I'm looking at their web numbers. I'm looking at ticket sales for the one theater group that we work with. And we're trying to figure out how to get better every day. And that self-analysis is a constant part of what you do. So here's the outside looking in analysis I would give to Tony Bennett and his staff, looking towards the future. And the first thing I would do is say, maybe, and don't change the pack line. There's nothing about the pack line. Don't change your tempo. Don't play a faster pace just because, Pack 40, who is an absolute moron, says to do so. Play your style. Play your pace. Play your mover blocker motion offense. Motion offenses work. Bobby Knight won a lot of games in Indiana with motion offense. Motion offenses are great because you can practice them and repeat and build muscle memory and don't have to call plays when the motion offense is working. But here's what you need when the motion offense isn't working. You need play like was run the other night, one time for Ty Jerome, where you post your guard, you post your point guard up because he's got almost a foot on the guy guarding him. You need ISO plays. If West Virginia's ball pressure is too much, you need something that can, okay, we're gonna scrap the motion for this possession or maybe a few possessions. We want to see how this works. The ISO plays. Let's get Kyle Guy one-on-one with his guy. Let's get Ty with one-on-one with his guy. Both those guys are actually really good one-on-one dribble drivers. Maybe a side screen and roll or a high pick and roll at the top of the key and see what action we can get going there. Next year, theoretically, Jay Huff will be part of that mix. He's a 7-footer who's got great mobility, pick and pop. I would love to see some pick and roll action with Jay Huff and Ty Jerome. I can only imagine how tough that would be to guard because if you try to double the ball out of Ty Jerome's hands off that pick and roll, and then you've got an athletic guy. Anybody who went to JPJ this year early and paid attention to Jay Huff and warm-ups, one could throw it down. Kid's got some ups at 7 feet tall. He's got the ability to do some things in the lane that will be interesting. Mamadi Diakite, same thing. I mean, run some high screen and roll action for him. He's a very athletic young man. Could hit the jump shot as well. So let's see some things like that go, or maybe sets some sets too, just some sets where you feature big guys. Again, we're going to have Huff and Diakite next year, a little bit more offense in the post. This year, Isaiah Wilkins, Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC, alongside Jack Salt. You had two guys in the post this year. Neither one of them is really a threat to score. You're going to have DeAndre Hunter next year starting for this team, whether it's at the 4 or at the 3. He's either going to replace Isaiah Wilkins at the 4. I think the best lineup, if it could work out, would be putting him back in the backcourt as a 6'7", incredibly tough guard for ACC guards to have to pick up DeAndre Hunter and keep him out of the lane with his ability to get the 3 in the mid-range jumper. Then if Jay Huff can develop the defensive skills enough, have him start and have Diakite as your third guy, your first guy off the bench in the post, and your third guy in that the 3-man rotation in the post. And that's going to be an offensive team, an offensive juggernaut type team. But give them some more options when things aren't working. Give the ability to, for Ty Jerome, who can get in the lane without a lot of help, give him some help to get in the lane, and make opposing defenses choose. Do they double tie? Do they slide back with either Diakite or Huff on that screen and roll, or even do some screen and rolls with DeAndre Hunter and really choose your poison at that stage too? And then either leave Ty, who's a really good 3-point shooter, and leave him open from 3. Make him cruise a little bit more is all I'm trying to say there. And give yourself some options when West Virginia takes away your action, or Virginia Tech takes away your action, or when NBC takes away what you can do. Give yourself some things that so you're not just calling timeouts and saying, run your cuts harder, run your screens better, because it didn't work the other way. It didn't work against Virginia Tech, and it worked. The offense worked. Obviously, the 31 games it worked, but in a one and done scenario, Friday night, shots aren't falling, and things aren't working. You need to be able to change things up. You need to be able to adjust and make the other coach adjust. I'm a big baseball guy. Now it's baseball season for me. I'm getting ready to get back into my ESPN3 broadcast schedule. And about baseball, one thing is, a guy gets hot. I guess Okuna's hot right now for the Braves in spring trainings. All these home runs the last couple of weeks, maybe last week or so. That's great. Guys get hot, and then the league adjusts. Somebody figures out, hey, you throw him a slider low and away, and get him out for a weekend, and then the rest of the league throws him sliders low and away until he proves he can get that pitch. And goes on a tear, and then it'll start busting fastballs in on your fist, and you got to adjust to that. It's a constant adjustment process in baseball. Same thing in basketball. And Virginia will have to give itself more ability to adjust. That's all I'm saying. It's just more ability to adjust. I would never suggest changing the tempo. Certainly never suggest the approach in general. I mean, Virginia wins with defense. It's kind of like asking Bill Parcells, "Hey Bill, you need to run a 4 wide receiver, 5 wide receiver shotgun offense and pitch the ball around the field to win games now, Bill, because that's the way you got to win games now." And you can't change what got you there, but you can tweak enough, I think, and win games when the odds are stacked against you sometimes, when the shots aren't falling, when the rim seems a little too tight, when your sphincter's a little too tight. Honestly, in NCAA tournaments, I don't if you've never been to an NCAA tournament game, the atmosphere is very intimidating. And we certainly felt that the other night. And I think, unfortunately, for that Virginia team, a team that rose the occasion all season long, they've been number one in the country for 5 weeks. They knew the pressure of playing with that set of expectations. They just, unfortunately, shrank in the moment. And that happens sometimes. The world isn't coming to an end. We saw this NCAA tournament this year. Kind of looking up at my description of this Facebook Live to get the sense of what else I was supposed to talk about. The truest incarnation of March Madness we've ever seen, it says, as I'm trying to lure you into watching this. You see Xavier lose last night to Florida State. A game that Xavier led by double digits most of the second half into the late minutes. And Florida State, a team that looked dead to me. Not just last week at the ACC tournament in that loss to Louisville, a game they were trailing by 25 points at one point. Didn't rally to make it close at the end, lost by 8. But in the last couple of weeks, Florida State didn't seem worthy of an NCAA tournament bid. I mean, the resume said it, but to me, I thought they were going to go out there, play the first game, and they'd be done. And now they're in Sweet 16. A Syracuse team that I didn't think deserved a bid. I thought Notre Dame should have gotten that last bid. Syracuse was the last one in, and Notre Dame was the first team left out of the tournament. I thought it should have been reversed. And in fact, I'm not sure if I thought Syracuse should have even been that close to the cut line. The way they played down the stretch. They're in Sweet 16. They beat Michigan State last night. So they're talking about teams who beat Xavier and Michigan State, 2 of the top teams in this tournament. One shouldn't have even been there. The other should have been in for a few seconds, of the tournament, in relative speaking. Carolina, a team that, after the way they played last week in Brooklyn, not just beating Duke on Friday night to get to the ACC championship game, but even in defeat, they played a great game against Virginia, cut their turnovers down, they shot better. Luke May played a great game. I would have thought at least Sweet 16, maybe Elite 8 to this team. It wouldn't surprise me to see them to go Final Four. Clemson surprised me only in the sense that, they had responded well after losing Dante Grantham back before the first Virginia game back in January. They lost that game, we all remember, 61-36. They had gone 7-5 down the stretch after losing Grantham and 7-5 after losing to Virginia. But they hadn't really beat anybody to get to those 7 wins. I should say 8-5 because they won one game in the ACC. So 8-5 down the stretch after losing to Virginia, after losing Grantham. And but they hadn't really beaten anybody to get there. And I'm surprised to see them in the Sweet 16. It's what it shows. And then what Cincinnati lost yesterday as well. I think they led by 22. I didn't watch the game, but they were up 22 and lost. So you have 2 number 2s down, 2 number 1s down. The South bracket is completely discombobulated. I think it's number 5 Kentucky, number 9 Kansas State on one side of the bracket, and then it's number 11 Loyola Chicago, who got a 3-pointer at the buzzer to beat Miami and knock the Hurricanes out in the first round. And let's see, so it's 11 versus 7 in that bracket. I can't even tell you the 7 is. Syracuse is playing Duke this week. You look at the 2 games they played in regular season, Duke should win that game by 20 points, but this is a weird tournament. Syracuse may very well win that game. It's so unpredictable. And it's why they call it March Madness. Someone pointed out after the Virginia loss to UMBC, one of the coaches who was standing up and defending Tony Bennett remarking that the Spurs' most recent championship season, which was a few seasons ago now, 3 or 4 seasons ago now, they lost the first game of the playoffs. That in the NBA, of course, play. I think it's best of 7 every round now. First round, second round, third round, then the finals. So in that format, the best team tends to. You can lose a game, you can lose a couple games in a round, but the best team tends to win. It's hard for the undermanned team to beat the established team 4 times. Even in the most recent huge upset in recent NBA playoff history, which I'll count at least I'll argue, was 73-win Golden State team losing to Cleveland. It was still Cleveland, still with LeBron James, the best player on the planet, still with Kyrie Irving, one of the best 4 or 5 players on the planet. And they had to win in 7 games to get there. After being down 3-1, there was a suspension involving Draymond Green that if he doesn't get suspended, maybe that series ends in 5. It's hard for the undermanned team to beat the better team 4 times in the NBA. But in college, you only have to lose once. I don't think it's hard to argue. It's not demeaning what UMBC did at all to say that if Virginia and UMBC had to play a best of 7 series, Virginia wins it 4 games out of 5 in this case, and a couple of those games aren't even close. But they only played 1, and UMBC won. Credit to UMBC, credit to Ryan Odom, who I'm not rooting against UMBC in this respect, but I'm rooting for Ryan Odom, young man, UVA pedigree. I'm a fellow UVA alum, so I'm rooting for you, Ryan, to get a job and take it somewhere else. And nothing against UMBC in this respect, but there are some Power 5 jobs that are out there for the taking, and I would take it because your rating is your star rating is not going to be any better than it is right now. All you can do at this point is not make a tournament next year and see your stock go down. So I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn there because it's going to be really hard for UMBC to keep him. I think he was getting paid $250,000 a year this year. If Pitt comes a calling, for example, you're talking a couple million. UMBC's saying now that they're going to do their best to keep him within their budget, but it's just not going to work. And I think that's a good thing for them. And I hope that UMBC can build after them. I mean, one of his assistants can take the job, certainly, and continue to build on what they've built. I don't know what they have left in terms of players, how veteran-laden the team was and that kind of thing. Didn't really pay close attention as far as that goes. But no question that, I know they're opening a brand new arena, and you get to raise a banner. I hope they do raise a banner. Those at the team's expense that I follow closely. They deserve it. So that all said, yeah, I think that this is what it is. We'll try to talk some more NCAA tournament basketball as much as I can pay attention to it, allow myself to pay attention to it. But shifting gears, we will be talking a lot of college baseball because my college baseball schedule with ESPN3 starts a week from Wednesday, January. See where my head is. I'm still in basketball mode. March 28th, as JMU will travel to VMI for a midweek game, Wednesday, March 28th. And we're hoping for better weather than we're seeing out there right now, with snow in the forecast in Virginia tomorrow and Wednesday. But next Wednesday, 6 o'clock start for that game. I'll be joining Wade Blanner in the booth. And then, boy, it's a really busy few weeks for me. We'll have 11 games over the course of about 30 days. As we have a couple of midweek games, the JMU game on March 28th. There's a game in April, Virginia Tech coming to Ray Minor Stadium in Lexington. I'll be calling that game as well. And 3 weekend series in Southern Conference play. So, shifting my mental approach as much as I can to baseball, getting ready to do some work with Wade Blanner. I'll be the color commentator on these broadcasts, and I love baseball. And didn't wish I was making this transition mentally quite yet, but we are. That is how life works. Sometimes it's very mysterious. Had a client ask me today for our marketing business, "Hey, Chris, what's your schedule like later this week?" And I said, due to unforeseen circumstances, my travel schedule got a lot lighter this week, so I could probably actually meet with you later this week. And such as life. I want to thank you for joining us here on Facebook. Also, we're going to pull the audio from this, and if you listen on a podcast and you're wondering, I kept talking about Facebook Live, what's the deal there? We will make this available as a podcast. You can download on iTunes. And for those who watched on Facebook Live or watched the the replay later on Facebook Live, yeah, you can go to our website on augustafreepress.com, and you can click on a link. It'll take you to information about how to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. But we're going to do these Facebook Lives as well. Love to have some of your questions and comments during them as we do them. We'll talk some UVA basketball. We'll talk college baseball. We'll talk some Major League Baseball. We follow them closely, the Nats and Orioles, local teams not too far from us here, 3 hours away or so from us here. We also have a lot of professional wrestling. So quite a few folks are used to seeing the warning come up that we are getting ready to do a Facebook Live on Augusta Free Press, and are used to be talking wrestling. So we'll be doing those as well. WrestleMania coming up here in a couple of weeks. We'll get you ready for WrestleMania, and then we'll talk after WrestleMania, of course, as well. And NXT TakeOver, all the rest, New Japan Pro Wrestling, ROH. We will cover the gamut there as far as pro wrestling is concerned. And one of my 5 dogs here, Bella, has decided that it's time for the Facebook Live portion of this to be over, and so we will end it. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast. Wahoo Wahoo.